Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is on the forensic psych topic of digital ethics in psychology. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Last episode of the year. Hi, Dr. Scott.
Hello, Dr. Shiloh. Good morning. You were already shaming me before we logged on to record because you've already got your presents wrapped. And like we've been saying this for the years we've been doing. Like I literally just put in orders yesterday for Amazon. So I'm going to be
That's why you have to order like before Black Friday.
It's true. Oh, it's so true.
And then Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you can do all of your like little stuff that pops up and you're like, okay, those look like good deals. But yeah, this episode is dropping on Christmas Day. Props to you guys that are listening to it on Christmas Day. Maybe you're like cleaning up or cooking or something and got your earpods in. And yeah, our voices are with you. So hope everyone has a really great holiday season. I'm thinking maybe just by looking at the outline, the size of our outline, maybe this will be a smaller, shorter episode. But last night I could hear Dr. Scott from the other side of the county, like pulling out his soapbox, polishing it off. So we'll see how today goes.
I think you'll be surprised. I think I'm just like, this is we'll discuss some things, but like, it's almost like, why even bother to rant about?
I think it's going to speak for itself today.
Seriously. So last episode, we dropped the live stream from our Berkshire Podcast Festival recording. But the full episode before that was on the topic of parasocial relationships. We examined how these often one-sided relationships can form, why the lines get blurred, and some tragic instances in which content creators were put in danger by their listeners.
Yes, great episode. Really cool to kind of take a meta look at some of the things we do and how we, just interact with and chat with our listeners these days, because there's so many different ways to do that, which makes it an overwhelming positive experience for people.
And this week's trigger warnings are murder and the sexual assault of children. So please listen mindfully or don't listen mindfully, because we want you to take care of yourself. This is a very big case that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah. So on to today's topic. We really appreciate all of you kind of sticking with us in this psychological ethics journey that we've been on in recent episodes, including the Berkshire's live show. And this topic is really no exception because it has a very timely tie-in to a recent criminal trial. So, this is called digital ethics in psychology, but kind of a way that I was introduced to this topic several years back, taking a training webinar, was really by the question posed was, is it ethical to Google your clients? And I'm sure we've all done it, but is it ethical? I don't know if anyone else has ever covered this concept other than taking a course in ethics and psychology. I mean, I know I've done it. Have you done it, Dr. Scott?
I definitely have. It's not a consistent thing. I have done it in the past. Just to back up one step for anyone, if you don't necessarily know what the definition, like the textbook definition of ethics is, it can get confusing. So there is a standard, a textbook definition of ethics, and it's the study of the principles that govern within our society what is morally right or wrong, and that is which guides human behavior and decision making. So that's like a one sentence down and dirty definition. It's really, really important to understand that ethics many times can be culture bound.
Sure.
And ethics is an evolutionary process. Now, I don't say that so that I can like squirm out of responsibility for, wait, who is this person that is calling me out of the blue for sessions and is very evasive in the information that they give? But yeah, I have done it in the past. I don't think it's a good habit. I don't know if I agree with your colleagues that in every situation it is unethical. Did you get any information on why?
That has evolved.
They explain it?
That has totally evolved, and that's what our research part will be on today. So let's put a pin in that for a little bit. But yeah, I think the first time it kind of ever occurred to me to Google my client was it was after you and I finished internship. I was working in a different county, and we kind of heard through the grapevine that we were going to be getting a client that sort of had this reputation for being arrested while being in possession of the most child sexual abuse images that the federal government had ever counted to that point.
Okay, that's got to be huge, because even when we were working together, we had a couple that like my jaw hit the floor on how many images and videos they had.
Yeah. So I thought, well, there's probably a news story on this. And this, looking back on it, I'm like, okay, what was my purpose? Yeah. Was it out of curiosity? Totally. I could probably try and justify it and say, well, that's going to be helpful clinical information to me. But I didn't need to Google it because I was going to be provided with all the clinical background that I needed from the files. So yeah, it was more of kind of a knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, okay, we're getting this person. Let me see if there's something out there on them. But yeah, I mean, it just off the top here, I guess, what do you see here as some potential issues clinically or assessment wise that could kind of border on unethical when we talk about like researching a client beforehand?
Okay, so let me explore this answer in a couple of different ways. One, my first response would be, as you and I have discussed previously and have been very straightforward about, that our field is populated with just as many strange people as any other field.
Sure.
Perhaps even more so, but I don't have any stats on that, right? I mean, one of the examples I use many times is that if you decide that you want to be an architect and you want to build bridges and major structures, you have a great task ahead of you. Like, you have to have design skills, you have to have incredible math skills, and you also have to pursue an educational trajectory that is going to be challenging. And it's not only challenging like, okay, great, I got into school, I can sail now. No, it's not it. Architectural schools weed people out at the end of every year because you cannot have a person graduate, and certainly no well-known school is going to allow someone to graduate that is potentially going to design a bridge that collapses and kills people. I mean, so there's a weeding out. Medical schools, for the most part, is the same way. Medical school is incredibly hard, and it weeds out a lot of people. I have some very strong opinions about that. I think it weeds out actually some really, really gifted people, and it rewards people that just have physical resiliency and can stay awake during their residency. Like, I mean, now, anybody out there want to have that discussion with me, I'm more than happy to. But that being said, I sat in a session one time with someone who was so wary. They only came back into therapy after being very, very burned by their previous therapist. And I got them to open up about it. And they shared that it was like during the holidays, and this clinician worked out of their home, and they had Christmas cards put up all over the desk area. And the clinician was actually having a spritzer for an evening session. Big no-no right there, right?
Oh, wow.
And then to also say, some of these Christmas cards actually are from my clients, and, some of them are big names. So please, just whatever you do, don't turn over that card that's right there at your left hand.
What?
And that was my response too. Like, wait, what? And then so we were able to process, like, I'm sure that could instill in you a sense of distrust.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Right. So the other one was my other response is, I think that we live in a world that requires maybe a little bit more discretion and preparation for providing services than we ever have before. And maybe maybe I spent too much time working with law enforcement. Maybe I've spent too much time working in threat assessment. And so that may very well be informing my perspective. But, I got the other taste of, like, years ago when I was a really wet behind the ears clinician. I had a client who had a sibling that is not a celebrity, just someone who creates content. But this was way before the onslaught of social media. And I remember saying, oh, right. Yes, I read your blanks article. And that was a big breach. That was a huge breach. My client was, I'm really uncomfortable that you did that. And it made for great work, and I took ownership of it.
I'm so glad
And
they said something. They felt
I was
comfortable enough to say
so
something.
absolutely, absolutely. I was so impressed by this individual. So that was a great lesson for me. That was certainly a breach in that
Hmm.
particular
Hmm.
section, but I don't completely close the door to the possibility that it might be appropriate in some ways. What
Sure.
about you? What's your response to what I'm saying? You can disagree with me, clearly.
Well, I do need you to connect a dot for me, talking about like architectural, study programs and med school. And how were you comparing or contrasting that to mental health professions?
Thank you, because I don't think that we have, well, it's not even that I think. This is a constant discussion within our field that there are people that get to the graduation point and beyond, and there are no breaks, there's no slowing down, there's no challenging. Every once in a while, we'll hear someone that doesn't get licensed or actually loses their job, but it's quite rare. I mean, it's like you don't
Sure.
hear it. But that just because it's rare doesn't mean that there aren't people out there making really wonky decisions. Like if you work in a big organization, you'll see a lot of wonky decisions made, like
Yeah.
strange breaches of ethics. And that's the connection I was kind of making, is that like there are some times where it's very clear and very egregious that this is who this person is, that you did that Google search because you went on a fact-finding mission,
Hmm.
which then can inform your treatment poorly, because now you are going in with an enormous bias. If you find
That's,
that your client
yeah.
has a different political stance than you, or your client has a different spiritual or religious belief, or that they, you see where I'm going with it, right? Does
Yeah,
that
that's
illustrate it?
exactly, that was going to be sort of my, high level answer to those questions of like, okay, off the top, how does it inform treatment or an assessment? And it could be bringing bias into the room that wasn't there previously, or nor, should it be. I was always somebody, and I know a lot of people had a different approach, but when I did an assessment, I would usually do my first, and I knew I was going to see them multiple times, especially because they were like mandated to treatment with me probably for years.
Yeah.
So it's not like I was going to lose them after one intake, but I was somebody that actually didn't read the file before. And I know a lot of forensic psychologists don't do that, but I know a lot of traditional forensic psychology assessments are like a psychologist going into a prison, getting to meet with somebody once, and that's it. I had the luxury of being able to just sit with them, talk with them, let them tell me their story, going back and reading, following up, coming back, and also determining how I was going to weave that into treatment. So I liked to be very unbiased from the beginning. So I think that's how I kind of view this a bit. But digital ethics is a big deal these days. I mean, especially since COVID, when much
Right.
of the clinical and assessment world went completely virtual.
Oh, yeah.
There have been many studies and experts who have looked at how we sort of transfer ethical considerations that we once only had to worry about in real life to how do we do business via telehealth. So things like, is therapy even successful via telehealth? How do you intervene if you're basically viewing through a monitor a harmful situation that's occurring, or you're getting wind of it? How do you know your client's even in the state that you are licensed in and you're practicing appropriately? So there's just so many things to consider. And this is not going to be a rundown on the ethics of telehealth, but there's a lot of overlap there that we have had to really kind of evolve in when it comes to conducting clinical services. But even way before we had such a widespread use of telehealth, we had the World Wide Web at our fingertips with a lot of information, including information about our clients, of which so much is online about everyone now, including vice versa, because they can look us up too, right?
Yeah, no, it's more complex. It reminds me of sort of when you get into the show The Good Place, there's a
Yes.
revelation about halfway through that the reason nobody's getting out of the bad place or getting into the good place anymore is because life has become so much more complex. I think that is part of what we are challenged by. I do want to put a pin in, and by the end of this episode, I want to come back to your decision to not read the C file. which is what we call the
Okay.
criminal file.
If
I
we
want
have
to come back
time, we'll do
because I
that.
think that's interesting. If we have enough time, I would like to. But
Yeah.
before we even get into the digital world, I want to lay a little bit of foundation, look at what we call the standard of care in terms of ethics. And when it comes to mental health, from our experience, the essence of a licensed mental health professional of any discipline, whether it's a psychologist, a social worker, an MFT, an LPCC, of course, our standard of care is the statement and the admonition that we do no harm. And we have those considerations, right? Do not exploit your clients. I can't even believe I have to say this. Do not have sex with your clients. We have a pamphlet here in California that
Yep.
if it is mentioned that you were approached by a previous therapist, if you ever had an essay, if you had anything like that, it is our law that we have to say, I have a pamphlet for you and we have to discuss this, right?
Yep.
Don't make them worse. Here's the other thing that we know statistically about therapy is you can freaking phone it in and just be present for a client and you will see improvement, because the mere fact that a person is in an environment where they have the ability to feel that they are being heard can lead to improvement. So it's not that hard to not
Really,
do harm.
it's true. It's
You
true.
like literally almost have to go out of your way to harm people. Now, when you go out of your way, I want to also fully exhort that if you don't deal with your own shit, you can do harm unintentionally.
Sure.
But I'm also completely indicating too that there's something going on with you if you're in a place where you're just unconsciously hurting clients. And yes, that can happen. But the context is really important here in all these settings. Forensic settings are going to have their own considerations different from treating what we call the worried well. And the worried well it is not a diminutive term. It's, it doesn't matter if you're drowning in 3 feet of water or 25 feet of water. You are drowning and you are in pain and you are in need of help. Certainly, some people may not be aware that they're in better shape than 90% of the rest of the world. And, something maybe part of the therapy is to reframe their perspective so that they understand that and find their own resiliency there. But treating the worried well in person via telehealth is going to have its own unique standards of care. And we have to take that into account. And that's something like I've had to gently chide clients. Don't, I see you're looking at various things on your computer screen. Oh, no, that was just a notification. I understand it's a notification, but you're not at work right now. And this is really important that we have this time that you're paying for.
Right.
To make sure we're addressing your needs. That's also not just to the top 15% of earners that come to therapy. I'm talking about people that are in lower income as well.
True.
It affects everybody because we live in this incredibly media saturated culture right now.
Right. So we have, that lovely definition of just looking at ethics, but then in our profession, we have this standard of care, which I think you're just touching on that is going to vary given different settings and might look different in a forensic setting from your traditional private practice setting. And an example I think that's really good is in my line of work as a police psychologist, I conduct both clinical services and consultative services within the same department. So I can be teaching a class or like sitting in on a meeting where other participants in that room are my clients or have been my clients at one point. That borders on having a dual relationship, but in the context of my setting and what my job duties are, it's acceptable. And the burden is absolutely put on me to keep really strong boundaries and a huge strong sense of confidentiality. Now they can be like, hey doc, I'll see you next Tuesday at 3:00 for our appointment. And that's on them.
That's a great example because it also speaks to knowing who the primary client is in any given setting, like prisons, which we're going to talk about in a second. And if you live or work in a small town as a therapist, you might end up being in a yoga class with clients. Standard of care is not about perfection. It's about understanding that there are so many gray areas that can still be ethical But it's also not about just covering your ass. It's about being aware and insightful that you have to look at the context in each and every situation. Now you have to do the right thing for your clients, not just for you. And this was gone over consistently, even at the master's level when I was getting my MFT, is they were saying for many people who were coming to this particular school, which was really well known for generating MFTs, that they were coming here to go to school, and they actually were going to be living in smaller areas. And this was way
Mm-hmm.
before telehealth, right? You might very well be getting coffee every morning from a barista that's your client, and
Sure.
you have to navigate it. You can't ignore it. You need to get to a level of comfort yourself so that you can be the one that holds that standard of care, holds that ethical boundary. And the standard of care for any given mental health professional is going to emerge from existing laws, the overarching licensing boards, the ethics codes that may be specific to your discipline. And there are
Mm-hmm.
slightly different aspects of ethics codes just from discipline to discipline. Social workers, MFTs, and psychologists do have some nuances in their codes, right? Then also you have your employer's policies. If you work for a huge county mental health organization, or if you work for maybe like a group practice, that they can have their own session. So it's a lot to navigate.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to start off with a recent criminal case that there's no one listening to us that hasn't heard of this because it's a big one. And then we can go back to examining what the experts say about ethical considerations when it comes to the digital world and our clients. Particularly, I think you chose, Dr. Shiloh, a really, really good case because it is current, but it's been going on for a while, and it was particularly tragic, and it grabbed the world's attention.
Yeah. So, I mean, this case and this nugget that we're going to focus in on today really then led to the topic, the research topic, the topic of our episode today. So that's why we're kind of going a little back and forth, give you a little introduction of, the ethics here. We're going to talk about the case, and then we're going to circle back to some of the exact things and do's and don'ts when it comes to digital ethics in this time, with social media, with searching people up and looking them up is just kind of a way we do things nowadays, and how that comes into play and how you should conduct yourself in your profession if you're a mental health professional. So we're going to be discussing some aspects of the Delphi trial from this year, 2024. We are not discussing the verdict or outcome of the trial today, or even the totality of the trial or the case at all, really. This is going to be a very focused discussion on the correctional psychologist's actions as presented in court. And we're getting that from the scarce availability of sources, which were really just news outlets who had reporters sitting in the room taking notes because there was no video or audio media allowed during the trial. So, as some of our friends like Bob and Allie sat in the courtroom every day for defense diaries and taking handwritten notes, and then, going back and doing some of their live shows on that as well as, the news outlets who had wrap ups. So that's where we're getting this information from.
So as a quick review of a very, very complicated and profound case, Libby German, age 14, and Abby Williams, age 13, had a day off from school on February 13th, 2017 in Delphi, Indiana. They both decided that they were going to go to the Delphi Historic Trails to spend the afternoon. And after not being heard from that evening when they were supposed to be picked up, a massive search was conducted for the missing girls. The next day, their bodies were found in a ravine under the Monon High Bridge. Approximately 5.5 years passed between the murders, which occurred in 2017, and when the suspect, Richard Allen, was arrested in October 2022. Richard Allen was arrested for the murder primarily based on his admission that he was also on the trails that day, and a similar ejected unspent round could not be ruled out as coming from his registered firearm. Later, while in pretrial custody, he confessed numerous times to numerous people that he committed the crimes. Richard Allen was convicted of their murders in November of 2024.
So I mean, Dr. Scott, you and I have both worked with pretrial populations in a couple of different ways. So I think it's important to kind of pause and explain what that means, just so we can start taking our audience through the lens of how you work with a pretrial offender versus a post-conviction or post-incarceration offender, or someone who is incarcerated, because of you worked with that population as well. But pretrial is exactly that, someone who's not yet been to trial and who has not been convicted or their case has not been adjudicated. And you can be in or out of custody during this time, just kind of depending on what the agreement is with the court. So, for instance, during our internship, we had several federal pretrial clients who were still out in the community. They had agreed to several stipulations, including going to therapy, in order to stay living at home with their families as their trials or court dates approached. I then went on to work with that same population for several years, both in the clinic setting, but also in my private practice. So I would have attorneys just refer their clients straight to me, and they would come see me during that time while their case was pending.
So I went on to work inside a prison for convicted offenders. It was a state facility. But then after that 3 years, I worked for a number of years at a county central jail where individuals were located who had just been arrested or were awaiting trial. So much more similar in the jail setting to Richard Allen's situation. So there are many ethical considerations depending on how pretrial clients are coming to see a therapist. Some of them, and you have a lot more experience over your decade of staying in that field than I do, some of them would be self-refer. This would be like in your private practice where you are working with clients that were referred by their attorney who says, you have got to go to therapy. Like, this is the only way that we're going to have any possibility of shifting the perception of what you are being accused of doing. Like, you have to do this,
it's
right?
It's going to look good. It's going to look good to the judge,
It's going to look good.
basically.
It's like certainly not going to look bad for you to
Right.
like take some sort of acknowledgement that you needed this kind of help. But since it's voluntary, it's totally confidential. And you, as a clinician, then are able to cover anything in the session. So the client is actually your client, which is different from a correctional setting, because when you're in the correctional setting, there is no confidentiality because you are an inmate of the state. You are basically, your rights have been altered. So that's where this all gets incredibly, incredibly wonky. And we're going to go into that. Generally, the most involvement a therapist might have is providing a client with a letter of their attendance, and then the attorney can submit to the court that, like, look, my client went and worked with Dr. So-and-so for 6 months leading up to this, and they have been compliant. It shows their willingness to engage in a structured blah, 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 right?
Yeah, whatever they want to say. I give that letter and they take it and run with it. And, I'm not called to testify or anything like that. Those were really nice. And I would say, on the surface, yes, their attorney's like, hey, get your butt in therapy because it's going to look good. But I would say 90% of my clients that came to me that way were really ready to do the work. They were like, I'm in trouble for something I never thought I'd be in trouble for. And this is very specific to sex offender work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to, ever do this again. And they were ready to start actual sex offender treatment. So that was to me sort of the loveliest situation in which, because a lot of offenders, when they have mandated specialized treatment, they don't get forced to do that in prison. And it starts after they're out and back in the community. And you have years that they could have been doing that work. So that was nice that they were actually ready to jump into that. Okay, so that's self-referred, total confidentiality. There is also, when someone is pretrial, basically mandated to be in therapy as part of their pretrial agreement with the court. So the court saying, okay, you can stay out in the community, again, in your home with your family, but we want you to go to therapy. So this was really what Scott and I stepped into our internships with the federal pretrial services contract that we had. And they were mandated to come to treatment. And if they chose not to, they would be remanded into custody and just await their trial from jail. So it technically is a choice because you can't force somebody into therapy. But in this case, Federal Pretrial Services was our main client, and the person sitting in the chair was kind of like our secondary client, if you will. So when they enter treatment, they sign paperwork acknowledging that they're allowed, well, not that they're allowed, that we are allowed to break traditional confidentiality in the sense that we will update their pretrial services officer on things like their attendance, their participation, maybe some general treatment goals, how they're presenting at therapy, that sort of thing. And again, they don't have to agree to this paperwork to sign it to go in, but if they don't, they will be going back into custody. It's not a great choice, but it is always a choice, and we can't, again, like force them to be there. So they do have an alternative. There were some rules as far as what we could cover while they were there working with us. Generally, we were processing the stress of going through a criminal trial, being arrested, all that comes with that. We were providing support. We were providing basically courses of treatment for things like depression and anxiety that you would anticipate with someone in a situation like this. Talking about the alleged crime or crossing over into that type of discussion of those behaviors, i.e. sex offender treatment or behaviors, was absolutely off limits. We did not want them admitting guilt, discussing the crime, nor would we want to treat them for something that they haven't even been convicted of yet. What if they're innocent, right? I mean, how unethical would that be to treat someone for something that they don't need treatment for? They get that in post-conviction, right? So we knew that was going to be handled at some point when either, some prisons had it as voluntary or when they get back out on parole. So this was taken incredibly seriously. We had great training around this, how we would steer people away from these conversations if they wanted to veer that way, because some people just wanted to talk about it, but we had to be like, time out, we cannot discuss this. It was really for their benefit. And we are still mandated reporters. So we were stepping into some territory where it really could have been mucky in a forensic setting. Because if they start admitting to something that maybe they haven't even been caught for, now we're going to have to report that. And that could be additional charges.
Right. Even if it is treatment that's provided in an incarcerated setting, prior to adjudication, prior to trial, or after, in a prison setting afterwards, there is a differentiation there between who has the right to confidentiality and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. But even so, if someone absolutely had the right to confidentiality, or if someone did not have the right to confidentiality, I always made sure on the stand to say that paragraph of, I, as a provider, am unable to do that unless confidentiality is waived. If the client refuses to waive confidentiality, I can't. And the judge knows what we're saying. The judge says,
yeah,
and this has only happened a couple of times, but the judge would say, I'm waiving confidentiality in this case. So it's complex. It's never like very black and white. And certainly, you can think that that paragraph is going to save your ass, and then the DA or the defense attorney says something that throws a completely different level of challenge into it. But I do want to go a little bit further in explaining those differences between jail mental health and prison mental health. So jail mental health support and treatment is very, very different from state or federal incarceration. And treatment is a term I use loosely. I think that we did, as jail clinicians, correctional clinicians in a jail setting, we did as much as we could. In Southern California, there is in LA County, the facility that I worked at is called Twin Towers. It's a very, very famous, enormous facility. And when I started over a decade ago working with the county, there were about 2 to 3 floors of the 2 towers that were specified specifically for mental health clients. And, as things have changed and our culture has changed, and there's been a lot of understanding of mental health and mental illness, the towers are now completely populated by individuals with a mental health diagnosis. It can include people with severe mental health issues or middle area challenges that are somewhat managed by medications. So say someone has pretty significant bipolar disorder, but it's managed with medication and they are willing to be compliant, then they would stay in the towers, right? It would also include people like those with developmental disabilities that are serviced outside in public by what we call here in California our regional centers for people who are on the more severe areas of the autism spectrum or developmental delay or intellectual disability. Now, and I don't know how it works in others. I mean, certainly we had incredible resources at the county, like incredible resources, incredible clinicians. If a person is just taking antidepressants, and I don't mean to minimize it by saying just antidepressants, but if you have a condition that's really well managed, like depression or anxiety, that's really well managed by something that's in the formulary and you're willing to take it, then they would put you in a position or in a setting called GP pill, and GP is short for general population. And it's not really like general population where you have people that are really more criminogenic, but it's a place of in that area that is physically safer. You know, the custody does its best to keep people safe, but it's in a large area with a large population, which means a larger incarcerated population. It is going to have a different level of challenges. Now, within that jail setting, what is generally happening is case management. So case management is about check-ins, sometimes 2 times a month, and making sure that an individual is taking their medications, reviewing the MAR, which is a record of the medications, making sure that there's no health complications, seeing how they're doing, if there's a different sort of level of care that needs to be implemented. But as far as therapy or treatment, that's just not happening. These clinicians have caseloads of over 200 individuals.
Got it.
They are
Good
on
for
the
context.
run from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. They're running. Now, there are things that are offered, like they have the psychiatrists, are there to prescribe medications. We also have nurse practitioners. We have doctors of pharmacy that are able to prescribe as well. But when it's possible and when they're staffing, we have what's called groups, like recovery groups, that would be AA based, or recreation groups, or anger management. But those things are facilitated by medical caseworkers who have been given training. Medical caseworkers are sometimes master's level, but usually bachelor's level clinicians. And they are doing a lot of the work that is really challenging because the population is changing all the time. It's like, well, this was my group here, but now that person got into an argument with another inmate and they've been moved to another tower. So it's really hard for them to have consistency. The other thing for high profile cases, and in LA, we do have a lot of high profile cases, celebrities who have been accused of sexual assault or are clearly guilty of sexual assault. I should not say that because they're still, they're just being held. Those people would be held in solitary. And there are some, it's not, believe me, it's no hotel room at all.
Sure.
But it's about keeping them away from the dangers implicit with other populations.
Yeah. Okay. So this, again, this would be more akin to traditionally what we would see with someone awaiting trial, perhaps. And I know this can take years and they might be held somewhere else, or they might be out. They might go into custody for violating some pretrial agreement, what have you. There's so many different varieties. But would you say, so again, like akin to Richard Allen's situation at this point?
Yeah.
How long would you see people, not like you physically or personally seeing someone, but what's like the longest that someone might be at Twin Towers awaiting trial that you've seen before? Sort of the longest stretch? A couple years?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that can happen. That can actually happen. I have examples in my head and I can't use them.
Sure.
Even though those people, those have already happened. But several, and it's like really egregious crimes, like somebody who is basically a serial killer or, has a murder charge, they can be held. I mean, I know the longest one I remember was 3 years.
Okay. So really it's with a caseload of 200 people in this massive environment. It's about stabilizing folks who are coming in, trying to keep people stable who are maybe there for a little bit longer before they move on to prison or being released or what have you. And then attempting to perhaps do some other things like the groups, maybe some substance abuse stuff, just with really high turnover.
Well, exactly. I will say one thing that is really great about LA County, at least when I was there, was that they also offered support for pursuing GEDs.
Oh, great.
So it's like
Okay.
if you were going to be there for a while and you knew you were going to
Yeah.
be there for a while, and sometimes you were doing your state time at county. And that's a whole other
Uh-huh.
discussion that we
Uh-huh.
can't really go into. But like
Yeah.
you've already served 6 months waiting for your trial to come up.
Right.
And then you get there and the judge says, well, this is what I'm going to give you as punishment, but you've already served this amount. So rather than transfer you to state prison, you're going to do another 6 months in county.
Right.
So those
Right.
people that are there for a long time, it's like if they never had the opportunity, they can be handed the GED book and they like literally will be studying. I mean, I think that's actually kind of cool, that can kind of
Of
get people
course.
focused on something that is more positive for their future.
And so just to like put an end cap on that, generally when people get a sentence of less than a year, they do that in jail, like what we're talking about here. If it's more than a year, then they would do that in state prison. But this is where I want you to just kind of maybe give us a quick and dirty comparison to what services were like in jail and what it was like when you were working as a prison psychologist.
Yes, thank you. So a real difference, but interesting that I went to prison first and then to jail rather than
True. I
people
know.
going to jail and then to prison. So let me kind of guide you through that as well. So one of the reasons that I pursued a career as a correctional psychologist right out of grad school, there were two things. One was I needed a job.
Oh, yeah,
And this
that.
was like a guaranteed job because it's a whole level of challenge that not everybody's up to and not everybody has to be up to it. But for me, it was a choice of like, I can go into a paid salaried position with benefits. And I'm also now I'm kind of interested into it. Like I got an exposure to forensics in my program and this is going to be cool. But I also had the experience, a personal experience of seeing the difference that access to mental health professionals can have on inmates in a state prison system who have access to those professionals, whether they're struggling with emotional stability due to the effects of long-term incarceration, or they're challenged by more serious mental health challenges or historical challenges, or a combination of any of those. I just saw the difference in my own life way
Mm.
before I was ever in the field. So correctional mental health providers in prisons help inmates get diagnosed and treated for things like, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, trauma disorders like PTSD, bipolar disorder, or even schizophrenia. And what was amazing is you would get some of these inmates on your caseload and they had no diagnostic history. And I'm not saying that
Wow.
now they're faking it. I'm saying that like there were things that went under the radar,
Sure.
family wise, culture wise, education wise for years. Just amazing. Like the number of people that were diagnosed as ASD in the prison while working on caseloads was just amazing to me. It's like, how did your family not know this? But then they don't have the context to know it.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of those behaviors just ended up being criminalized or coming out in that way, and that's how it was handled.
That's exactly it. So working with the psychiatrist, they could also be prescribed medications. There's medication management groups for people who need help understanding, how do I do this? How do I get on a regular schedule with medication? I've never had to do this before. But one of the things that we know, the benefits from this is that we reduce recidivism when we provide mental health support.
Huge.
And
Yeah.
there's a whole other episode probably at some point of doing a deeper dive into issues I've talked about that on one hand, if inmates were given the opportunity to be really busy and productive, then they wouldn't have as many mental health issues. But there's another layer. It's like if you're distracting yourself with work and all you're doing is focusing on work, you may be actively avoiding things that are emotional and mental health issues
True.
that actually contributed to why you were engaged in criminal behaviors in the outside world. But when mental health issues are addressed, inmates are less likely to reoffend once they're out. So that's just statistically borne out.
Yep.
I don't really care what the political, the pundit arguing about it is. It's like, it's ridiculous. I don't even engage in that argument anymore. We have stats. If you don't understand math, then I'm not going to explain it to you. But we also provided a lot of other things, like some people would get really overwhelmed and attempt to harm themselves. There are other people who would get themselves in trouble with the population by making some very poor decisions and then engage in self-harm behaviors because they knew that was their only way of changing their geographic location within the setting.
Sure.
So that happens. One of the amazing things for me was doing trauma work with some of the inmates who just never even had a concept of what trauma was. Like, doesn't everybody's dad just beat the shit out of them every other day for no reason at all? Like, well, that's just normal. I mean, I grew up, I'm a lot stronger for it. I'm like, really? Are you? Let's talk about how that's affected your relationships, right? So for those that were on a time basis, like they got 5 years, and we know that they're going to get a reduction because they're really well behaved. They do their program. They're probably going to be out in 2 years. Like, let's see what we can do to prepare you for transitioning back out into the world. How are you going to avoid the triggers and the pulls, the magnetized pull towards your old lifestyle? And sometimes that's about, is it really good for you to be hanging out with your family all the time if your family is what is encouraging you to do this? So life skills, that's a real big one, transitional life skills.
So it sounds like there's a lot of like case management, just checking in on folks, but also you have the luxury of time and resources at the prisons to do some long-term work, have more stable groups and options for, skill-based mental health services as well. So would you see people one-on-one, like in an office, just kind of like therapy, as well as running around to jail cells and saying, hey, how's it going today? Was it a mix?
In the prison or the jail?
In the prison.
So the prison, it was fascinating. They came to our office area, and there were different offices or group rooms on every yard. The prison I worked at was an enormous prison with 7 different yards. It was about 1.5 miles from end to end. It was just a wild experience for me coming right out of grad school. But another thing that you just had to roll with in the setting is that there were lockdowns. And I worked on high acuity yards. So if there was a threat from another yard that a rival gang member had been sent to our yard and had been laying like a sleeper cell and then was going to instigate a fight, and they found out, and they always found out because there were all these people snitching. It was like a huge soap opera type situation. So sometimes you'd be like on lockdown for 4 days. So if we were on lockdown, I still had to see my people. I had 175 people on my caseload.
Oh, wow.
So it'd be like, well, I've got these 12 people that were scheduled for check-ins, and I would be running all over that yard. Like, okay, I'm going to go into housing unit A, and I've got 7 people there, and I would go cell front. And nobody ever wants to talk cell front because they're not going to talk to the business. Nobody wants to reveal anything. Yeah. But I would be like, hey, I brought you, here's a sheet on square breathing. Here's some coping skills. Here's are you interested in crosswords? Here's 3 sheets of a crossword if you'd like to do that, spending your time.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. But then I also did groups, and I would do a men's process group that had 22 people in it. That was really cool because there were some old timers in there that were never getting out. And
That's a big ass group.
Yeah, they were very different. There'd be old timers in there that were very different from who they were when they came into the prison system. Sure. And they would really, a lot of them were, I mean, I have to say this with no irony, nothing but absolute respect for some of these people that are like, I really screwed up my life. I made bad decisions. I was a bad person. I am working at being better. Let me see if I can keep this young kid who may get out of here in 6 years. Maybe I can have an impact on them. I mean, those kind of people actually do exist, even within that framework.
I saw it, with the parolee population, and those, no joke, were probably some of the most wise people that I've ever sat in a room with.
Right.
That they just had gotten it. and were also trying to influence the next generation of knuckleheads that thought they were awesome and going to, just so easily transfer back into the community and have no problems. And they were like, oh no, youngster, let's have a talk about how this really goes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think that's going to be really helpful, kind of just laying that foundation for our listeners today as we get into talking about primarily one particular day of the Delphi trial. So the prosecution called Dr. Monica Walla to testify on day 11 of Allen's trial. Dr. Walla reported that she was the, quote, lead psychologist at Westville Correctional Facility, and Richard Allen was in her attending care while he was in custody. So Dr. Monica Walla is a licensed psychologist, and that is out of the state of Indiana. We found that her license is current. But I need to say, this is already an unusual situation in the sense that Allen was transferred to this prison facility rather than being kept at the county jail. So his safety was cited as a reason for this, but we don't really have time to get into that and some of the other rabbit holes that kind of spin off from there. But it sounds like they said maybe with such a high profile individual, we don't have the resources to keep him segregated or what have you at the county jail. So they thought this was the next best thing. Dr. Wallace said that her primary goal was ensuring Allen's well-being during his time at Westville. And during her visits or sessions, I'm not sure what these were, and maybe we can talk about the differences in a second, kind of comparing and contrasting what you just outlined for us. So those sessions with Allen, she took notes on a pad of paper and then transferred those notes into an electronic database. Exactly what I've done my entire career in every setting, forensic or private. I think, when things come to court, people are like, well, why aren't those handwritten notes kept? It's just not what we do. Like it's chicken scratch. It means something to me. I'm going to put it into context when I have time to sit down and breathe and put it into the computer. I just wanted to make note of that because during the day that she testified, she's reading from notes that she took, as she should be. And I think there was just kind of a little bit of a thing kind of made of that the court didn't get to have into evidence, like her actual handwritten notes. Any thoughts on that, Scott? Anything you think differently or do differently?
So, well, it's already confusing because what is her role here? And the discernment of what Dr. Walla's role was in this particular situation absolutely colors whether or not she shares information in the way that she shares it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because he is not an adjudicated, sentenced individual. He is pre-trial. He is awaiting trial, or he is in the process of trial. He is in a setting that for some reason we don't know about, which is whether it's safety or convenience. It could be any number of things.
Mm-hmm.
But why is she engaging with him? I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me as a correctional psychologist. And also, what the hell is a lead psychologist? I understand that my perspective is that I work for the state of California, or I worked for the state of California, and there were levels. I mean, we had clinical directors. We had then supervising, there are like two different layers of supervisors under the clinical directors. And then all of us sort of baseline clinicians reported to supervisors. And you stayed within your discipline. Like there's a silo of information. So lead is a weird term because in our field, we use the word lead to be indicative of all people who are all on the same level of superiority. And lead is assigned by a supervisor is like, okay, you guys are going to develop a treatment protocol for blah, 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 blah. So Dr. Scott, you're going to take the lead on this project. I know I'm splitting hairs here, but to me, it's really important. Because I'm not even sure what the silo looks like in Indiana in a state prison.
So my understanding is that the state prison contracts with a mental health professional entity. I forget what the name is. I know it's been mentioned in some YouTube videos. And So therefore, she worked for that entity, and then she would come into the prison and do her work. The only reason that that's notable, and we'll mention it later, is just now she can still do other work that I guess that company contracts with. She's no longer allowed to do work in this prison. So it sounds like it's not state or county or government employees like you just outlined has a
They're
structure
contracted.
to it. Right. So it's not a particular like job title with like this chain of command like we're used to. They're contracted. And maybe this is her own word. If we talked in our Berkshire Podcast Festival live show about the fancy names people give themselves all the time. And it's hard. It's hard for people listening to it, an audience, to decipher like what is a legit title or backed up by a certification or a degree even, and what is just like I think we use the example like criminal psychologist. Like, okay, well, what does that mean?
Well,
so anyway.
I'm only going to touch on this because we really don't have time to go into it, but thank you for that information because it does offer some very valuable context and something that I don't even have the energy to pull my soapbox out about, which is about contract providers working in incarceration settings.
Yeah.
That is a big problem. It's a huge problem because the accountability, I have worked on cases recently trying to work with contract agencies in other counties about clients that are on my caseload. And there's like, it's awful. It's just awful. Because why do you hire a contract agency, Dr. Shiloh?
Well, because you don't want to pay high-level clinicians inside your own agency or inside your own entity. You want to
save money. It's a cost-cutting mechanism, and it's one of the So that's not good.
I mean, do you think that correctional psychologists, because I think this is such an unusual situation, I'm sure you never saw it where someone was brought into the prison you worked in who wasn't going to be, hadn't been sentenced already. But do you think correctional psychologists are sort of cross-trained in a sense of like dealing with a pretrial arrestee or dealing with a convicted offender? I imagine it would just be based on where you're working out of, where you're getting that training.
It would never have happened in the agencies I've worked in within the state of California.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would not have happened. We don't know. There's an absence of information available to us. However, someone in her position should have been highly educated or determined. This is what your role is here. This is what your role isn't. Don't go here. Don't go into this area. Your role is just for this. I don't understand why. It's just very confusing. I don't understand. We're getting into it. We're going to get into more details, right?
And I'll say this one last thing before we move on to like getting into what she testified to, her interactions were with him. But let's say this highly unusual situation happens. She and her team, meaning I guess the people back at the agency where she contracts, there should be consultations happening. There should be, here's an unusual situation. Here are parameters. Like we need to do grand rounds and make sure this is something that every T is crossed and every I is dotted, just because it's so highly unusual. And
it's also high profile. Like it's so incredibly high profile and it's highly unusual. All the stops should have been pulled out.
Yeah, you will be going to court. So we need to be on our super uber best behavior. Okay.
Right.
There we go. So, let's get into it.
Okay. So Dr. Walla began seeing Alan in November of 2022, and her visits were reported as being daily because he was on suicide watch for about a month. And that is absolutely accurate. Suicide watch basically means you are within eyesight of custody. And most likely, at least in the state of California, I know that on suicide watch, you have custody circling every 12 to 15 minutes.
Right.
And it's not just from sort of a bird's eye view from an Erie, but actually a person going to the cell, tapping, especially if the inmate is refusing to engage and like is laying on their bunk facing away from the door, the person, and then the custody is required to write a note down, saw motion of breathing, hand moved at this time. So yeah, there's a lot of protocols in place. But Alan was placed back on suicide watch about 4 months later in April of 2023. And Dr. Walla testified that this is when, quote unquote, things took a turn. And although she advised him not to talk about the case, she did start documenting confessions from Alan about the killings of Libby and Abby. These confessions included statements like, quote, I committed these murders on my own, close quote, and, open quote, I made sure they were dead so that they didn't suffer, close quote. So there's no indication in the information that you and I have access to determine if Dr. Walla thoroughly explained to Alan what his rights were in regards to treatment, or just educated him. Like, it'd be almost like a forensic explanation, right? It's not just psychoeducation. It's like, I have to lead you through the steps of what your rights are here. But we don't know. Maybe it happened. Maybe it didn't. Limited information right now. Again, at least in my experience, the emphasis was on treatment and the pursuit of stability. Limitations are to be explained explicitly to the inmate in regards to confidentiality. I will say this, when I worked at state prison, one of the only complaints I ever made about a colleague was that this colleague was pointedly questioning their client, an inmate, about his charge every time.
Ugh.
It was complete countertransference.
Yeah,
the psychologist had read the inmate's C file, read it for details. That's not why the inmate was coming to treatment. The inmate was coming to treatment for panic attacks, and the clinician just drilled him over and over again. And I was in a position where I had to make a report. Anyway, Dr. Walla testified that Alan had told her that he had had sexual intent towards the victims, and that he estimated that they could have been anywhere between 19 years old and 11 years old. She also documented that Alan said in part that and I'm just going to go through these bullet points really quick. He's saying about himself that he was selfish, a coward, and took their own lives to save his own. He stated he wanted to apologize to the victims' families. He stated he wanted to go back and change his actions. He stated that he thought a problem began when he was a child. He stated that he experimented by molesting his sister. He stated that he became an alcoholic and had help from his wife, Kathy. Dr. Wallace stated that he talked about a belief in God and hoped that others found God before they die. That he wanted to give a Bible to Abby and Libby's families or someone he thought needed help. And then that he was glad that he didn't kill himself so that he could see his family. Dr. Walla went on to testify about Alan's religiosity, recalling that Alan slept with a Bible, asked for a chaplain, read his Bible often, talked about God, and expressed concern for her, Dr. Walla's faith. Dr. Walla additionally testified that Alan's presentation was varied throughout his time at the prison. This included variations to his emotionality, that he was at times tangential, yet she did not believe that he experienced hallucinations. She noted that Alan entered Westville Correctional Facility with depression and anxiety, but felt that those conditions had improved, but unknown when or for how long the symptoms had begun before he was incarcerated. Were they lifelong? None of that information is available to us. Again, what I'm confused by here, one of the many things that I'm confused by here is why she was pursuing this line of therapy and questioning. The inmate client has not been adjudicated. Her job was not to focus on these subjects. Now, that being said, I've been in the position where I'm completely trying to redirect a client, and they absolutely every time come back to something that is not the subject of our treatment. That does happen. I want to leave a little bit of wiggle room for this happening. I also want to note, and maybe we could do another episode on this particular challenge if there's a criminal element to it, is what we call relational or relationship OCPD, which is relational obsessive compulsive personality disorder. It's not OCD.
We talked about that already.
Right.
Relational OCD, but yeah.
Right. So it's this need, especially also when someone feels bad, they have a need to confess. So
Mm.
Possibly that's what's going on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
was she questioned? So tell us what he said about, did he confess to anything? Or were they just saying, okay, tell us everything that he said? What's the context for how this information was elicited from her? Do you understand? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
You mean like
Okay.
while she's on the stand in court? Like
Yeah.
how is, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I'm sure everything was gone through with a fine tooth comb, especially in a high profile trial like this. But I mean, if you're testifying as a mental health professional, even if the judge has said, you know, confidentiality needs to be waived in this case, and you kind of have freedom to talk about everything,
Right.
you're still only narrowly answering the question and holding back as much as possible. It's not a blanket to just, read everything verbatim. Now, if you're asked to, and that's been approved and that's okay, and then yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that's how this went, because some of the news articles literally had day by day listed with the date and then her notes taken that day. So whether or not they got that, I don't think from evidence, because I think that's been part of the gag order, but or not released yet, that it seemed very much like a just dictation of the notes in some cases, such as her notes from 5/2/23 documented Allen's repetitive statements and saying nonsensical things like, I killed Abby and Libby. I will kill anyone. I will wipe out everybody. I killed myself by killing my entire family and best friend. Just things that weren't really tracking or making sense with known facts.
Okay.
She testified that Allen didn't present as being psychotic. However, she said his behavior was inconsistent in her estimation, and she believed he was, quote unquote, sane. I just want to comment that it's interesting to note that sanity is more of a legal term, and there was no evaluation as to sanity conducted by her, nor, does that sound like it was her job to do that? And it would be a dual relationship if they had her do that. But that's what she's testifying to.
And just to piggyback on what you're saying, just remind me again, make sure I'm not misrepresenting this. The idea of sanity in that context of criminal activity is the idea, was the person aware at the time of the commission of the crime that what they were doing was wrong? Isn't that like a huge component of?
Yeah, I mean, that's what evaluations are normally conducted for, right? Because we separate that out from, are they competent to stand trial in the moment that the trial's happening? She's talking about an in-between state, right? Like while he was in her care, I'll say that instead of treatment. So it's kind of this in-between, but I would use other language if I was up on the stand rather than saying, yeah, he seemed sane to me. I would talk more about behaviors and observations. Because if I haven't done an evaluation, then I'm just going to report observations and behaviors. But then she goes on to testify that she monitored Allen for, quote, situational psychosis, which at times would last about a month, and then he would return to, quote unquote, normal.
Are you familiar with the term situational psychosis?
I've never heard it before.
You know what? Like, let's just do this in real time.
Okay.
Let's just do this in real time.
Are you Googling it?
Yes.
This is all about digital ethics. We're not Googling a client. We're Googling a term. No, I haven't. I think there's probably a much better term for that if I think I know what she's saying.
Okay. So that actually is a term. I
Okay.
was not familiar with it. Situational psychosis is also sometimes called brief reactive psychosis and refers to, and I'm quoting, a temporary state of psychosis that occurs suddenly in response to a significant stressful event or trauma, causing symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized behavior, which usually subside once the stressful situation has passed. Basically, a psychotic episode triggered by a specific situation or circumstance.
Okay.
So it's supposed
Does
to
it
be
say how long?
It's supposed to be less than a month. So I'm not really understanding, and I'm not going to go into it right now. I'm not going to research it any further of what the difference between that and a brief psychotic disorder is, because what our terminology is brief psychotic disorder. I understand now that there may be some sort of differentiation or discernment between brief and the specifier of situation context. I would say that, although I am not fully familiar with the definition of situational psychosis, this is the first time I've looked at it. She's talking about a number of statements he's made over an amount of time, and he is vacillating between those 2 points. He's not constantly in a state. He's coming back. He's taking responsibility, or he's claiming responsibility, and then he's making nonsensical statements. So now, again, I will leave ample room for wiggling there. And if there's a timeline that works out that this would be actually real, but I think that's not also in the DSM, and I don't think that that is really appropriate. I think when you're on the stand, you probably need to be sticking to more agreed upon diagnostic criteria.
Sure.
A brief psychotic episode is a sudden onset of psychotic symptoms like delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, catatonic behavior, really disorganized behavior. It lasts at least 1 day, but no longer than a month. If it's longer than a month, then it turns into something else. And there's also a significant and complete return to baseline functioning after the changes. So the specifier, there is one with marked stressors, and that's where it says here, brief reactive psychosis. The episode occurs in response to extreme stress, such as trauma or a significant life event.
There you go.
But this is a person who perpetrated on other people. So are we going to say that you're having a psychotic episode because of the follow-up, because of the trial of something that you committed 5 years ago?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into the conditions in the prison, but no, I think it's a response to extreme stress of his life event of being in that correctional setting under those conditions. I don't think it's due to the crime. I don't think it's due to the crime.
Okay.
No. But regardless, I think this is what I would have used up on the stand because that covers it. It's right there, right? If she's saying situational psychosis, I guess we don't know what she's referring to. I don't want to try and mind read for her what she's saying the situation is.
Totally
I assumed
agree.
It was him being in prison.
We probably got more pauses in this episode than we have in any of our
We need to release video of this.
But my response to that is I have seen incredibly inexperienced individuals who have been sentenced to prison, and there has not been any level of stimulation to this point because there are safeguards in place. Now, but let me say, this was a high-profile case. This was a person under a lot of pressure. The idea, I mean, this person would have been on the bottom of the rung as far as prison hierarchy.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, I will make room for the fact that he hopefully was not put in general population. If he was in general population, it could have been really terrifying.
Well, I mean, that defeats the purpose of putting him in the prison facility altogether.
Yeah, I mean, again, why is he in the prison? There's so much there we don't know. But okay, so let's we'll back it up and we'll give Dr. Walla the brief reactive. I'm on the fence about that.
So the next date of her notes, which is May 3rd, 2023, it indicates that she began an examination for said situational psychosis. She testified that Alan had disorganized speech and disorganized behavior. She also noted more of what she called confessions from Alan. And in her testimony, she recounted that Alan confessed that he saw the girls on the trails, followed them across the bridge, and mentioned doing something with his gun, which she said is how the cartridge could have gotten there. Now, I just also want to pause and say, that line of questioning is interesting, and I don't know how that all played out because that's not necessarily her determination to make how a cartridge got somewhere. That hopefully was put together by some other experts because I can't imagine ever saying something like that in court. I would just say, yeah, he mentioned he did something with his gun, period. It's not for me to then make a leap of what happened evidence-wise. He then told Dr. Walla that he ordered the girls down the hill, across the creek, wanted to sexually assault them, but didn't. He, quote, cut their necks, made sure they were dead, covered the bodies with branches, stayed off the trails to leave and not be seen, then continued to live his life normally ever since. Dr. Walla believed Alan, quote, appeared to be normal, end quote, during the time of confession, and showed signs of relief after his confession to her. This is just a lot of information and a lot of territory that I think, as Scott and I have outlined, would not be something we would engage in if we were the forensic psychologists in her shoes. So I hope that's kind of coming through here. In subsequent days, in May of 2023, according to her notes and her testimony, Alan said he wanted to just sign my confession. That's a quote. And she advised him to talk to his attorneys. He also told her that he wanted to snap his neck and kill himself.
Okay, so her advice there was spot on perfect.
Sure, yeah.
You need to talk to your attorneys about that. You need,
Yes.
like, this is discussion for your attorneys. I'm here. Let's work on, how this is stressing you out.
Right. And then if a client of ours, and we don't have this information, so I'm not judging this, but if a client then says they want to snap their neck and kill themselves, that's something you then explore and do a suicide assessment with. So I'm going to assume that was followed through with. A few days later, Dr. Wallet noted that during her visit with Alan, she was present while Alan spoke on the phone with his wife, Kathy, because he wanted her to hear his confession to Kathy. So it sounds like he requested that she be there while he talked to his wife. During that phone call, Alan told Kathy, quote, "I killed Abby and Libby," end quote, which then prompted Kathy to hang up. Alan then said, quote, "She doesn't believe me. I didn't do everything I said, but I did kill Abby and Libby," end quote. Dr. Walla observed that Alan appeared calm and displayed no signs of psychosis during this interaction. The next day, she documented that Alan expressed a desire for closure, saying that he wanted to apologize to the families of the victims. So this seems like a lot of days of a lot of, her documenting conversation around him talking about the crimes.
Well, I'm also trying to envision a situation where a correctional clinician would agree to be part of a conversation like that. Okay. I'm glad. I didn't know what your reaction was going to be. I can't wrap my mind around it.
I can imagine saying something like, "I understand if you want support while talking to your wife, but legally this feels really messy. How would your attorneys feel about it if I was there?" Those sorts of things.
Exactly.
There's other things you can do. Hey, the second you get off the phone call, we can have a session or we can meet and we can process it. There's other options.
So according to the news sources that we have, Dr. Walla's notes then make a jump to September of 2023 before going back and referencing back to April of 2023. So they're jumping back and forth. They're referring a little bit out of order. That's not unusual. That's certainly not unusual in trying to just organize your notes. But what is stated is that in September of that year, Alan appeared to have a significant amount of suicidal ideation. He is reported as stating that he wanted to go to heaven, but admitted that he was afraid of dying. He said that he didn't know if he would make it to heaven and was scared that he wouldn't get to say goodbye to his family. And he also shared feelings of being a burden to his loved ones. Okay, so now let's go back to April of 2023. Dr. Walla testified that she advised Alan it was not in his best interest to confess. She also stated that she believed Alan was showing signs of fake memory loss and other behaviors.
There are tests for that, by the way, which wouldn't be her job in this case to do, but I think it just highlights.
But then you can't comment on it.
Yes, but I think it's worth a moment to say that, clinical judgment alone isn't a great way to make this determination. So I would have loved to hear why she thought that he was faking memory loss. Again, what are the observations that you're seeing? You can report observations without reporting a conclusion, right? And we do that all the time. That's actually super appropriate. So instead of saying, "Yeah, I think he was sane," you can say, "Here's what I saw." And then you leave it up to the person that you're telling this to.
You're a licensed, trained, educated professional. Your job is to observe. Mm-hmm. There are times our job is to interpret as well. This is not one of those times unless I'm missing something.
Yeah. So April of 2023 is also when some very erratic behavior is observed by Dr. Walla. She noted that he moved his arms up and down, refused to answer her, skipped meals, urinated outside the toilet. and was naked with papers scattered in his cell. He also engaged in inappropriate behaviors involving his private areas. And Alan was seen clapping, banging his head on the door, and refusing recreation time. Those are great observations, very specific.
Yeah.
Gives the reader or the listener a great picture of what's going on.
So Alan's condition continued to worsen and fit the criteria of what we would observationally call decompensation. He was noted that he began eating and lying in his own fecal matter. And despite these significant behaviors, Dr. Walla concluded that his actions did not yet meet the criteria for involuntary emergency medication. Just as a side note, that's not your job to determine whether or not medication is appropriate. You're a psychologist, you're not a psychiatrist. I would say that this would definitely be when you go to your boss and you say, we need a psychiatrist in here. We need an emergency psychiatric evaluation right now. We also need him in actually what is called FIP, forensic inpatient hospitalization. So if someone is engaging in corpophagia, eating their own feces, that's a whole, whether they're faking it or not, that's a whole other thing, right?
Issue.
She stated that she believed that he might be experiencing an emotional breakdown triggered by the discovery documents. So this was at a juncture point within the proceedings, I guess. At this point, Alan was barely sleeping, and finally a psychiatrist was consulted. Finally, after continuing to eat his fecal matter, he was forcibly medicated. Here in the state of California, we call that a Reese action. It's a law within our state that allows psychiatrists or psychiatric staff to force medication, which is a shot, something that will either reduce emotional instability or reduce symptoms of psychosis. Later in the month of April, Alan mentioned to Dr. Walla that he wanted a medical diagnosis to explain his actions. Walla noted that his thoughts shifted between rational and incoherent. Alan spoke also of experiencing a quote unquote mental divide. And Walla believed that this might have been an attempt to manipulate his situation, potentially avoiding medication or to see his wife or to request a transfer. Dr. Walla testified that on some dates, Alan's bizarre behavior appeared insincere. That, to me, is a great observation.
Yeah.
His behaviors are inconsistent with previous admonitions and previous level of functioning. For example, on this date, blah, blah, blah. That just, again, observation.
Yeah. And sometimes whether in an evaluation, in a report, or if you're testifying, you have a bunch of observations. And sometimes at the end of it, it is nonsensical and you can't give a determination one way or the other. And then it's for whomever that report is for to do with it what they will. We can't always say it's this or that. And it's completely irritating. It's irritating to the psychologist doing the evaluation. But I know it's also irritating to the readers, in some cases, attorneys. Yeah.
Okay, you bring up a really great point. What is the role here? Is this an evaluation? Because we have court evaluators. It's like, okay, you're coming in as a fact witness or you're coming in as a treating clinician, but did you ever actually do an evaluation? And the evaluation is the important part about their level of functioning. That would include the treating psychologist or the treating clinician's observations and interactions.
Yeah, I think, that probably gets tricky when listening to us, because every time you and I see a client in private practice, we're doing like a little evaluation, a little assessment of just how the heck they're doing in our head, right?
Right.
But that is not a formal evaluation with a formal referral question that you're trying to answer. So can
you define that? You should define referral question because you do a great
job.
So
a referral question is just what are we looking at here in terms of how they're doing, possibly what their diagnosis is, and then how does that inform treatment? So occasionally I will get I'll just use in the job that I'm in now, a referral question for someone coming in and me doing an assessment would be, are they at risk of harming themselves, right? That could be a bunch of different things. It might not also, it could be, but doesn't have to be a suicide assessment or evaluation. It could be, are they in need of support services because they have an anger management issue, right? It's just like very specified to figuring out if we need to get them more support or services. And I don't do diagnosing at my job where I'm at now. There's nothing in terms of like record keeping that has to be done in that way or insurance that's involved. So it's nice. A lot of places do, and you will have a diagnosis at the end of a formal written report. But I've also, when I work with sex offender population, the referral question would be, what risk level is this person at for recidivism, right? So at the end, you're trying to put them into a category of low, moderate, or high. And that's the answer for the court, what they want. So we're constantly doing evaluations or assessments in our heads of just like how our clients are doing. But that's the difference between a formal one. And that definitely has to be clarified if you're testifying to that. But I could understand on the stand if she is being asked, well, what did you think about that? You saw that, but what was your determination? Right? Was he sane? Was he this? So you can be sort of forced into coming up with something on the fly if you're skilled in the trade craft of testifying. If you're a forensic psychologist, which you should be, there are ways to answer those appropriately and not feel like you're being forced into an answer by a savvy attorney. Okay. So that is just kind of the piece of the pie that is the role of a forensic psychologist in a correctional setting. Here's the major tie-in to our digital ethics piece, because if you don't know the details, you're probably like, where the fuck are you guys going with this? This does not match with the title of the episode. So during cross-examination by the defense attorney, Brad Rozzi, Dr. Waller revealed she no longer worked for the Department of Corrections. She admitted to following the Richard Allen case very closely on platforms like Facebook groups, podcasts, and other online sources, which intensified over time, meaning this was during the time she was having him on her caseload, which in court then raises concerns about her impartiality, right? So Rozzi questioned Dr. Waller about also accessing confidential Department of Corrections information using a department computer, which is a huge no-no. If you work for a government agency or contracted with them, you cannot use their resources for your own curiosity. If you're a cop, you're not allowed to run the plate of the car sitting outside your girlfriend's house. That is illegal and will get you fired.
Also, once your handwritten notes have been transcribed digitally or to an EHR, an electronic health record, they're to be destroyed. So why is there still access to them? If she had, is it indicated to us that she had them on the stand?
No, not handwritten notes. That's
okay,
what,
great.
No.
So they should be handing her a transcript or copies of her notes.
Yeah, printed out her notes. Yeah. So, but back to her accessing confidential information, she was actually accessing information to look up this other guy who had been arrested on other charges, who was a person of interest in the Delphi murders a while back. So I don't know if
she was looking up somebody that wasn't her client on DOC.
Yeah. And another inmate.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So Dr. Waller admitted to doing so and acknowledged sharing information publicly. I don't know what that information is. I don't know if it has to do with confidentiality breaches. All I have is she acknowledged sharing information publicly, including on Twitter accounts like Defense Diaries, True Crime Forums, and Facebook groups. When asked if this violated the APA, American Psychological Association guidelines, Dr. Waller described it as a gray area. We will talk about that more. So according to WLFI News out of Indiana, Dr. Waller, quote, admitted that she shared information about the case with Allen and acknowledged that she would have approached her involvement differently if given the chance, end quote. So not only did she share information publicly on forums, she then read information and came back and shared that information with Allen in a clinical setting.
Rozzi, the attorney. I was going to say that's ironic since he basically said he would have done things differently too.
Yeah. So defense attorney Rozzi also revealed that Dr. Waller commuted 90 minutes each day to work at the prison and closely monitored developments in the case. While Waller claims she informally discussed her interests in the case with her supervisor, Rozzi then challenged her about a lack of formal reporting. The defense even mentioned that Dr. Waller had visited the Monon High Bridge essentially she went to the crime scene.
Yeah, folks, this is not a commercial break. This is just
A pause for thought.
This is a what the fuck pause for me.
It's a mindfulness moment, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so let me regroup and go on with a quote from WLFI's article that we have referred to several times for this episode. During the redirect from the state, Walla was asked if her supervisors were aware that she was a fan of true crime and had taken up interest in the Delphi case. Walla said that her supervisors expressed no concerns about her taking on meetings with Allen. After a few months of meeting with Allen, Walla began to share information she saw from podcasts and online with Allen. Walla said that she wanted to remind Allen that he had supporters and for him not to give up hope.
Alrighty.
Yeah, again, another WTF moment. And I think I've actually just worn out my soapbox. I've just literally worn it down to the ground. So let me move on with about just sort of the questions that pop up, right?
Yeah.
This is what we started off with that you said we're going to come back to. And this is about were limits of confidentiality explained?
Sure. So the limits in this case, how would it, this very unusual case. Let's say you're working at the prison. They bring in this trial person for safety reasons or what have you. He ends up on your caseload. What would you explain about the limits of confidentiality?
That is a really good question. So I have to preface it with, first, I never was in that position.
I know.
Right? So, and usually me, I'm always ready to go off and go, well, what if? What if I did this or whatever? And this is one of those cases, I think, through sort of my journey through this episode today, I want to be really careful. I've never been in that position, but I can imagine, because I was in that position, a similar position, working at a prison and working with a very large caseload. And I worked in the jail within the prison for people that had gotten in a lot of trouble. If I was seeing somebody like this, I would be consulting all the time.
Non-stop.
In fact, I went to my supervisor one time, wonderful, wonderful supervisor, Dr. Clint, just a great guy, and said, I think I'm out of my depth. I really think that I'm out of my depth here. And he was so fantastic, so many great professionals I had leadership from. And Dr. Clint was, well, let's break this down. Let's break it down. And then exactly what supervision is right? You're breaking it down as to, well, what is your role here?
Mm-hmm.
And what do they need to know? And, that's the way I would have done it. I would have gone and sought out supervision. And then I would have gone back and I've said, hey, I need to clarify some things with you. What you tell me in this situation could hurt you because you don't really have full confidentiality. Anything you say to me can be brought out on the stand.
Right.
Now, maybe Dr. Wallen never had to go on the stand before. And that's something that here in California, we are reminded of all the time. And when I supervise clinicians, I say, you write every note as if you were going to be on the stand and questioned about what was going on and why you put that period in that particular place. I mean, I say it over and over again.
Yeah.
Even though the majority of times you're never, ever going to be called on the stand. I mean, it's very rare, except for those of us that work specifically in this area. So again, the questions were the limits explained. What did the referral information indicate? And why wasn't that explicitly discussed during the trial? Again, the referral question. Dr. Walla, what was the referral question for your being here today? What were your responsibilities in this situation as you understood them? And maybe we don't have the full transcript. So maybe that's in there. Anytime an inmate is referred or requests mental health support, there's a standard psychological evaluation and an intake process. Why is this not referred to in the research material? I mean, one of the things that I understood in the California Department of Corrections is that for many inmates, they assumed that being in mental health was a soft option. Let me get in mental health and then I'll get medications. And some people had secondary gain from that. I'm going to cheek my meds and I'm going to sell my meds. I'm going to sell my Seroquel or my Wellbutrin because other inmates enjoyed grinding it up and snorting it. I don't recommend that to anybody. It's one of the it's apparently one of the nastiest highs ever, and not even really a high. It's just something to do.
Hmm.
But so people would come into mental health for a number of reasons, which made the assessment and evaluation portion even more important, because we've got to figure out if they actually meet criteria for
Right.
services, right?
Mm.
I just don't understand these missing elements, and maybe time will tell. Maybe at some point we're going to have more information to make this determination. But Dr. Shiloh, I'm going to throw it back to you. Gray area?
Yeah, going back to, is
What?
Googling your client, is this a gray area?
Okay, well, wait, hold on.
refocusing.
Let's not say Googling your client as far as like being a private practice person as opposed to this situation. I'm not really sure those are
No.
comparable.
I am leaving the Dr. Wallace situation behind now. We're just diving into the research at this point. And
Okay,
what
great.
does
All right,
our
we're done.
training say about our ethics in this area? So as we kind of started off, is Googling your client a gray area? Let's find out, because it's so much more about just looking someone up online. And no doubt we're in and I'm laughing because I'm looking at the clock and we're approaching 2 hours. And I was like, this is going to be a shorter episode.
This is going to be a quick episode. Yay.
Stick my foot in my mouth all the time. So we are definitely in a digital era of digital communication and services, and those just completely run the show in mental health. We have had many ways of communicating in our everyday lives that may differ between the various relationships, right? Like you and I rarely call each other. We do, but generally we're texting throughout the day, going back and forth. We communicate with our loved ones in that way. Somebody sends, a reel or a TikTok or whatever. And that's our little communications throughout the day, right? That's just what we're used to now. And our clients are like that as well. So we're going to kind of take this topic by topic and give you some idea of what the ethics world in psychology in the United States thinks about this. This comes directly from a legal ethics course that I have done from the wonderful Zur Institute. For anyone who has had to get CEUs in their life, I'm sure you've probably used the Zur Institute at some point. But Dr. Zur, who started the Zur Institute training and CEU website, he is an expert in legal matters when it comes to mental health professionals and particularly psychologists. And he is called to testify all the time about what the standard of care is, what the ethics codes are. And he was using some examples during this webinar that just like blew my mind of what psychologists are doing and what they're getting in trouble for. So with that, let's start with texting, right? We all do that for sure. If it's clinical, it's generally fine, especially if, there are some hardcore like DBT therapists out there that do coaching, what they call coaching with high risk populations. So you are essentially signing up to make yourself a very available clinician, but it's still clinical, right? It's all clinically related. If the texting goes beyond clinical, therein lies the issue. Chit chat, exchanging pictures, links, texting into the night, self-disclosure, those are probably going to be boundary violations. Not all of that is going to be clinical, and that actually might not be great unless you guys have agreed upon it or if there's some sort of emergency to be texting into the night. It's up to the clinician to set the boundary about what is clinical communication and what is not, or what will not be. So if you text with clients, definitely this should be discussed at the beginning of treatment, like, hey, you're going to get automated text reminders. Or if you don't show up to therapy, I might text you and say, hey, are you having trouble with your computer? Are you running late? Do we need to reschedule? What have you. Also inform them that text can count as part of their clinical record. There are cases where texts have been entered into evidence when the psychologist's behavior has been called into question. Usually it's going to be like a civil case, right? Like they're suing their therapist for something. But there could be other reasons in which records get subpoenaed that if you're going to choose to text with your clients, they need to be informed that that can be part of their clinical record. Then they're not saying something via text that they don't want out there to the world potentially. Any thoughts about texting, Scott?
So, well, I wanted to make sure that our listeners understand what you referred to when you started this particular section about our conversations. If you and I are consulting, it's always, hey, can I call you?
Oh, yeah. No, I just
when do
meant
you have a
you and
second? I need to consult. We're not exchanging any kind of information via text. I mean, and I would never do that. In fact, when I have had texts from clients, and I do, it is a part of our world. People no longer answer the phone, and there are times that you need to get in touch with people immediately. I have rules about what I allow. So I keep text engagements to coping skills or reflective listening. I hear what you're saying. It sounds really hard. Let's talk about, can you do this, this, and this? Check in with me tomorrow. Those kind of things. But I want to make sure that there's no confidential information of any type being kept in an electronic transmission. Is it going to get leaked? Not likely, but still, I think that's a good boundary for, like, this is not treatment. This is an adjunct. This communication is an adjunct to our treatment. I mean, I think you hedged yourself a little bit. You said it's probably not good. I would say it's actually a lot clearer than that. Like the don't exchange memes or jokes, or, I mean, if there's like a wry comment, that's one thing at one time. If there's that level of humor that is established in the clinical relationship, but the back and forth, or like, a ongoing conversation, I don't think is appropriate.
Right.
So you also pointed out in a research point, which is great, the disinhibition effect. And this is a phenomenon of an increase in self-disclosure by the therapist and the client when you're not in the room with them. This is fascinating to me because by video, audio only, or texting, and this can be good on the client side of things. For instance, they may reveal more if they're disinhibited. They may feel more comfortable not being in the room because being in the room makes it so real.
Yes.
Right? They may attach being just 3 feet away from you on the couch as being way too intimate. Whereas speaking across the distance, the ethers via video may make them feel like a little more comfortable in that way. Now, on the other side, my problem I have with it, I don't mind doing teletherapy, but I do prefer having a few in-person sessions so that I can understand what this person does with their body movements below the shoulders. And I do think that that's very important. But I have come around significantly about my respect for teletherapy, not only by what I'm providing, but also my experience with a telehealth therapist that use currently. The idea about all of this, or the research or the focus on this, is really very interesting in where we are here in 2024 post-COVID as compared to where therapy really started with Freud, the talking cure, as it were, where you weren't even looking at the therapist's face. In fact, most people they forget that when Freud started, he not only put them on the couch, but he tapped on their head. And there were several clients who are like, I really want to share this with you, but that tapping is really annoying. Will you please stop touching my head? So there's something interesting about not looking at the therapist's face. Maybe that could be akin to the disinhibition effect.
Yep.
But I also think that the next step in the evolution of our emotional stability and development is to be able to look in someone's eyes and share these things that are troubling you, because that in itself helps engage in an intimate relationship, which is so important to therapeutic success, I think. Now, when it comes to the therapist doing too much self-disclosure, there's a lot of debate about that within the community. Some disclosure can be very, very helpful, but it can also be problematic. The session is not about the therapist, and it shouldn't be about the therapist. But if there are examples or parables or sort of what if situations that may include an element that may or may not be true about the therapist's life, because that is also used, then that can be helpful. But yeah, if it's just a chit chat session about how great of a therapist you are, that's not good.
No. Or if they text you saying, sorry, I can't make it, and you go, great, we'll reschedule. That's appropriate. Not, oh, sweet, because I just wanted to crack open this bottle of wine anyway. I get to do that
Oh,
early.
thank God.
It can be as little as that.
Edibles ready.
Yes. Okay. So the disinhibition effect is real. It was interesting in the training on this. They talked about the disinhibition effect even being magnified in nighttime hours. So that's why they were linking like don't text into the night. So not only not being in the same room or speaking to that person is influencing that, but the evening hours, we kind of let our guard down or a little more disinhibited or what have you. So that was interesting to hear about. Another thing that gets therapists in trouble in terms of ethics when we talk about the digital age is what we call the Yelp trap. Clients can now review your services on Yelp-like sites, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they have the right to do that, but the trap can be if the therapist responds and perhaps is responding impulsively. So an example would be that a client writes a bad review alleging, some bad behavior, and the therapist gets on there and responds, I didn't do it. Okay, that's just a tiny sentence with 4 words, but what's the problem there?
Well, the problem is you just admitted that you were providing services to this person, and that's a breach of confidentiality, even though the individual was the one that wrote it, right?
Yep, you broke confidentiality. So the advice is to take a deep breath, do not write anything back, and then you probably want to get some legal consultation. Also, you cannot ask your clients to rate and review your services online because you're now asking something of them, could be viewed as exploiting them. However, if there is a bad review and you want to have good reviews out there, you can ask colleagues to rate your known services and professionalism. They can get on there and talk about as a peer, I would recommend this person, what have you. Bottom line, do not acknowledge any rating publicly because it might breach confidentiality. And ethics experts advise that if you get a negative review, do not contact the client. Don't try even legal defamation, and don't offer a refund. Don't do those sorts of things to try and make it right. Just let it lie and realize it's what comes with having a private practice in this day and age.
So one of the things that happens on a lot of these services is that you have to have a presence in order for them to write about you. Now, there are some where you can create, like, I don't like how Jane's Pharmacy treated me when I got my medications refilled. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look, oh, look, they have a website. Oh, they have a Yelp. I'm going to put a review here. Mm-hmm. But if they don't have one, it's not, you can't set up a business like a person.
Got it.
So that's one thing. I mean, Yelp may have changed, but I know that there are other review sites like this as well. Like, TripAdvisor just lets you write about anybody, basically. But one of the things is that, yes, people in private practice have a business. You are an entrepreneur. You are running a business. So part of your business may include a public presence where people can post. We were taught my master's level of training, our law and ethics professor was fantastic. And he covered certainly everything that was available at the time, but this was 2 decades ago. And some of these things don't exist or did not exist yet. Right. But one of the things is that you absolutely, absolutely cannot. It is not ethical. It will get you in a lot of trouble with our licensing boards, no matter what your discipline is requesting reviews from your clients. You absolutely cannot do it. And yet every single day when I'm going through Psychology Today to look for referrals, or because part of my job helps people with private insurance find clinicians that might work for their family. And you click on the person's professional website and they have like a page that's all quotes from clients. That is really badly done. Like, did you seek out those quotes? Because if you did, that's really bad.
Yeah.
If they told you this, you're the best therapist I've ever had, you've changed my life, that's really wonderful. That's for therapeutic process. That's not
Yep.
for use in advertising. And it was said to us over and over and over again that you can't do this. So I don't understand why people continue to do it. It's really badly, badly done.
All right.
Now,
Let's get
I
to
would
the
say
main
this about,
event.
well,
Oh, go
wait,
ahead.
I wanted to say one thing about the defamation. Now, this is rare, but if you were in a situation and you're accused of doing something in the process of therapy, like sexual assault, that's a whole different story. If they like make a like that kind of accusation, you have to talk to an attorney.
Talk
Now,
to an
and then leave
attorney.
it to them. Leave it to them to what their advice is. But those are the things that can actually completely ruin people's reputations if they're not
Well,
true.
and talk to an attorney through your mental health clinical
Discipline.
insurance, because
Yeah.
you can't just go breaking confidentiality.
No, you cannot.
But let's get to the main event of Googling.
Yes. So, Googling, there's actually no code of ethics on this issue.
Yep.
Interesting, huh? So it is suggested that if you do this, you need to put it in your consent to therapy paperwork, something like, at times, Dr. Shiloh may conduct a web search about you. No, I'm just kidding. At times, Dr. Shiloh may conduct a web search about their client before starting therapy or during therapy. If you have concerns, address it with your therapist. So if you're a therapist who sees clients in your home or late at night, or you're just concerned about physical safety, it would be understood to be legitimate, like a legitimate need to perhaps Google, and we're using Google as a term of like any kind of background, search your clients beforehand. And this statement would cover you. So what if you Google them and you learn something outside of what you learned in the room with them? And how would that impact treatment? That's a big question, right? Because the ability to do your job, that's how are you going to do your job knowing that you are a holder of secret information?
It's just something you have to consider before you even open that can of worms. And I think something I was talking about at the beginning. But yeah, it is. You have to be careful that you don't slip and say something that you learned from there and not from them in the room. It's a lot to juggle.
I think about this example. I went to school with a man who was biracial and multilingual, and I think really gifted as a clinician. He had been working in community mental health while he was getting his doctorate. And he's a very dark-skinned individual, and it's very clear that he is of a different ethnic background, but it's kind of hard to place him because he has, some varied genetics. And in public mental health, he was assigned a case for an Aryan Nation family with a severely disabled child. So he was a case manager and their family therapist. And so he had to sit in the room with somebody who would come in covered with white supremacist and related order tattoos all over his arms. The wife and mother of the child would come in with clothing that was adorned with things. And what happened over the time that they worked is they found out that this colleague of mine did really great work for them through the court system, helped them, get the care that they needed for their child, all this kind of stuff. And yet he still had to be on the receiving end of those effing blank, blank, blanks, but not you. We don't mean you. You're completely not one of those guys. Right. So I think about that in this kind of example of, well, what would you do if your role as a mental health clinician is to help people address the issue that they're bringing into the room and maybe pull back and look at a bigger picture of their stability, their emotional functioning, their interpersonal skills. But what if you click on a website that shows their grand poobah in an organization that is completely antithetical to your lifestyle, to your belief system? I think that would be hard to hold. Even though our job is to be the holders of emotion for our clients many times, that would be double duty right there.
Well, and that can come up at any time. Countertransference is something to be worked through, but sometimes there are instances where it cannot. And, clinicians can be changed. So I think I really like that statement to put into your paperwork, consent to therapy paperwork, just because it covers all of that, because you might say no to taking a client, and that's okay if it's something that is going to be that distressful as a clinician.
So I think you're onto something right there that even drills down further, is that you may well find a conflict of interest that you can take care of before you're 6 sessions in, and you find out, oh, this is a big conflict of interest.
Yeah, for sure. And, this whole idea of Googling the clients, and I think the last thing that you didn't get to yet was just, that the client might feel offended that you Googled them if that comes out, right?
Absolutely.
Like they might want to reveal something on their terms to you when they're ready. But the stance on this has absolutely changed, really just in the past 8 years or so, because I took this course back then and it has a different tone now. It was a big no-no to Google your clients when I did it 8 years ago or so. I think some of these issues have really been like challenged legally now, and they have to consider all instances a bit more. So I like this tone. It just makes a little bit more sense to me of like, yeah, there are some situations where absolutely it makes sense that somebody would Google their clients. What I think it comes back to is, do you have a good reason for it? And this is something to ask yourself. Like, is this about my safety? Is this something clinical, or I'm getting an idea of something that's a huge conflict of interest? Or I'm just being nosy and I just want to know, or I just want to like speed up what's happening and get more information first. That's what you have to ask yourself.
Right.
So another issue that is more relevant today is being quote unquote friends on social media with clients. And there are multiple issues here, right? Dual relationships, confidentiality, client privacy. Again, it's very similar to texting in that if you are DMing clinical information, how might that impact privacy, confidentiality, and the perceptions that you are maybe real friends and creating a dual relationship, not to mention like how that all can be leaked and all the other things we already said about texting, like disinhibition effect is there, are you now sharing more personal information? Just the fact that you are quote unquote, I'm using like friends in terms of like added a friend on social media. What do we do with that? So interesting in all of this talk, they say that they kind of make the distinction between a professional social media account and a personal social media account. LinkedIn is considered a professional one and not personal. So I guess there have been some legal cases on this already where it does not constitute a dual relationship if you are just adding your therapist as a friend on LinkedIn and vice versa. Therapists can also have their different social media business pages, which, let's face it, like in this day and age, if you have a private practice, you are hustling your business, you are a marketing professional, you are, a lot of people find therapists through social media these days. You are wearing many different hats. Ethically, these should be kept separate from personal accounts and also consider your privacy settings, right? Do you want to be put in a situation where your new client now adds you on your personal Instagram account?
Yeah.
Why even open it up, right? So there are some codes of ethics, depending on the discipline, that completely forbid adding clients as friends. So make sure you check if you are a mental health professional. It's also suggested to put policies, again, into your informed consent to therapy paperwork, because then they're reading it right up front and they know what's what. Like, if you add me as a friend, I'm not going to approve it. Here's my professional page or what have you.
Yeah. So self-disclosure is another point. Therapists are allowed as individuals to put their lives out on social media however you want to. You're allowed to do that, all your family's hobbies, interests, but just be aware that most new clients do Google their therapist before. That's how they find us now, because that's our way of advertising, which again, talk about how things have changed over the past even 2 decades is like, we weren't supposed to be able to advertise ourselves in the past.
True. Oh, that's
And
right. Yeah.
that's really opened up. So just be aware that it's not a simple, superficial way of advertising. People can, with just a few extra keystrokes, get a lot of information on you as a clinician. There are different levels, of course, looking into someone from a light Google to full on cyber stalking, which hopefully most people will never have to experience, I hope. But anyone with a virtual presence could actually be susceptible to that.
Yeah. So, this is a tie-in to if you are a mental health professional, you're doing your job. There are considerations just kind of privately, but those of us who work in the forensic realm, and there's other realms where you can have a high profile client, of course. This is just like obviously hits home for us and is relevant to the case we cover today. How do you conduct yourself by doing your job? Even if you are somebody who enjoys true crime, if you're a forensic psychologist, you probably like true crime. There's something about this like giant umbrella that is interesting to you, right?
You have found it to be intriguing. It makes sense.
Yes. And you made it your career. But I think there are very clear rules in place. There are also some gray areas that you need to use your best judgment. And if you just don't know, you need to consult with your close professional friends like you and I, Dr. Scott, or other colleagues. But I think at the very least, just some final touch points on, how would we conduct ourselves if we had a high profile client where you should see the writing on the wall that testimony is a possibility. If you work in a forensic setting, always work as if you're going to have to testify or as if your records are going to be subpoenaed at the very least. Very, very least. Just keep that in your head. If you have a high profile client, you absolutely should be conducting yourself in the most professional, ethical manner possible. You are the one that will have to answer to how you conducted yourself on the job and then on the stand. Other thoughts, just kind of as final pieces here?
So taking into account the example that we explored earlier, regardless of how long you're in this field, and if you're in just clinical work or if you're doing forensic work, you are required to take notes.
Yeah.
If you are licensed,
yes.
You are required to take notes. And it is not ethical to not take notes. And it may be problematic for you or for your client at some point. And that's just one example of many things. Not to say that, if someone has an ethical breach doesn't mean that they're a bad person, but, come on.
So what should people consider if they are thinking about doing maybe a little extra research on the client's high profile case? Again,
what if you find out how is it going to impact your rapport? Are you such an iron-willed therapist that you are absolutely able to separate yourself? You very well may be. A great example of this in entertainment is Dr. Melfi and Tony Soprano, right?
Sure.
Because for a long time, she really, really was able to completely separate herself. And then for the purposes of what is a great operatic show, really, really great show, is, she becomes a victim of sexual assault. And she knows that she could tell Tony and it would be taken care of, right?
Yep.
This guy that got off. But that's a bit of a dramatic one. How iron-willed are you? And that's not just about whether or not you're going to reveal what you know to the client. It's going to be about what your countertransference is. And countertransference is the misplacement or displacement of emotions that emerge during the therapeutic process. How is it going to impact your ability to provide appropriate diagnosis and appropriate treatment for your client? Will it lead to you just asking about the things that are not clinically relevant just for your own curiosity? Like, oh, you're the hairstylist for Rihanna. I want to know all about Rihanna, right? Like, some people would want to know that, but it's not appropriate for the therapeutic room, right?
Yeah.
Will the way that you're interacting with them in a forensic setting, will that jeopardize the case in any possible way? Because you are to remain neutral. You're not working on behalf of the prosecution or the defense. You are working on the behalf of what the client is presenting.
Sure.
Like you are there as an arbiter of information. If you were asked to interpret, you will be asked to interpret on the stand, and it's always framed with my clinical understanding would be, or my clinical perspective would be this. And then you have to be prepared for cross-examination, because the other attorney is going to go in, well, Dr. Scott, isn't it true that in 1963, Dr. So-and-so's seminal effort of work on this particular area of diagnosis on page 63, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to get some of that no matter what, if you're going to be on the stand a lot. You can always stop a session if your client doesn't refrain from talking about certain subjects. If they're constantly derailing to something that's not appropriate or integral to the therapy, there may be reasons why they're doing it. You want to get to the reasons of why they're avoiding, right? Because that is the clinical point right there. Again, I'm kind of dumping clinical and forensic together right there, but you want it.
Sure.
It is your job to be sort of the lion tamer of a 3-ring circus many times when you are sitting in the clinician's chair. You always have to think about the potential of testifying, justifying your behaviors, justifying your actions. Our example today, I think, which was I don't know if I was ever found myself in that position, maybe I would be answering the same way. If I had to do it again, I would do it differently. I mean, I actually kind of feel, because I don't know what else you can say except that.
Yeah, maybe that's the only thing left to say sometimes.
Right. But again, you're keeping the referral question and the treatment goal in mind. You're monitoring for any passive or active suicidal ideation. We want to reduce depression and anxiety. We want to lower the temperature of the emotions so that the person has like a more emotional stability and safety. And then also, if they're the presence of psychotic symptoms, then we need to treat those. And by the way, just kind of going back to our example, if there is the emergence of symptoms of psychosis, that is immediate next level of care. That's not anxiety. It's not panic attacks. It's not trauma work. Psychosis is a different set of chemicals being released into the brain. It requires a higher level of evaluation, and that's a medication referral. And then this is just plain. You don't comment on public forums, groups, social media on cases, or interact with crime and consumers. Look, I get it. We do that. You and I do that. That is what we do. Sure. But we're very plain about, we don't talk about the cases that we work on. There have been many that we were like, oh, we can't touch that. We can't touch that for years, if ever, right?
We're very conservative about what we cover, just for our own, comfort in walking through our jobs every day and interacting with others. So yes, I think we're uber concerned about a lot of that. That's a really good rundown, things to consider if you get someone on your caseload who's high profile. I had not a reverse situation, but different situation where I was working with someone who then became high profile. And yeah, like it was such a unusual, weird spot to be in. I had worked with them for a couple years. I got a heads up that they were going to be arrested for something very high profile. And it was like, all right, I got to lock it in. I mean, it was like a matter of days that I knew that, because obviously I wasn't going to just keep seeing this person when they're like, they've done some horrible things. But it was very strange to know that they were going to be arrested at any time. Just a weird situation. But after the arrest, I mean, I definitely researched the case. It was in the news. It was all of that. So it wasn't like I had to dig deep. For me, I was looking at the dates of the crimes and see how that coincided with treatment, just out of what did I miss? What was going on? Yes, I want to say that was not pure curiosity, because I think it was a learning lesson for me. How can I go back and see how I can do better? And I ended up testifying about the treatment. Nothing above and beyond that did I do until after this was all completely adjudicated, in terms of, I don't know. I don't even know what else I did after that. I mean, I guess just kind of followed the case, and there were some shows and things like that put out about it. But, I was just a consumer of that sort of thing, but I wasn't treating the client anymore, obviously, after they were arrested. So I wasn't in that dual stance of having to still be their clinician while they were going through this. But yeah, it was something that I was like, oh, and trust me, there was tons of consultation. Leah, she was my boss still at the time. And we all talked about this as a team. what does this mean? How do we conduct ourselves? How do we get our records in order? Not just when it went down, but also years later when I had to testify. Like I didn't even work for that place anymore. And I actually went over to Leah's house and we looked at records together to prep for testimony.
For our listeners, we've often talked about our previous supervisor, Dr. Leah. Amazing, just amazing supervisor, mentor, guide, educator. So you're even giving an example of like the highest level of what we should all be really shooting for, right?
Yeah, I had really great support around me during that time. So I think for me, my ending thought on this is, look, you can be a consumer of true crime, have that interest if you're working in the field. And like I said, it's probably why you got there. But do not be a fanboy or a fangirl while being a professional or about your current clients. It's not appropriate. That needs to be separated out. And if you don't think you can do that, I would hope you have the wherewithal to say, I probably shouldn't be the person on this case.
Or seek supervision of your own about why you're having that experience. You know, you can, if it's something like, well, no, I've been working with this person X amount of time. It wouldn't be ethical of me to just completely cut off right now. Mm-hmm. But I do need to hold myself to a higher standard and go and get supervision and mentorship. And I can get that from you, or I can go to my other colleagues and go, okay, I need to sit down with you for about 30 minutes and process this.
Yeah. After you're out of training, I mean, we generally just call it consultation rather than supervision, but yeah, same thing. It's the same exact process, really. So I hope that 2.5 hour episode made sense.
That's a lot.
Oh my God. It is. So as we look to 2025, there are going to be some changes to the show. You will still get 2 drops each month. So don't worry, we are not reeling back in that sense, but we're working out how that's going to go while trying to make room for some just new goings ons in our professional lives. So more about that next time. What else? Anything else? Everyone just have an amazing rest of the year and Happy New Year. And it's 2025. My gosh, we hope the rest of the year treats everyone well. We appreciate all you guys so much, especially if you stuck around to the end of this episode.
Hopefully,
you're special people.
Just so you know, we had to take a couple of bathroom breaks. So,
oh, thanks. That's some inside baseball right there, everybody. Woohoo. All right. Well, with that, there goes 2024, and we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, folks.
We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawlspace Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on X at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on Saturday afternoon. So pay attention to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.